An Introduction to Sociology A-Level. Think about these questions. Why do men tend to earn more money than women? Why does Britain have higher levels of teen pregnancy than most other European countries? Are we free, or do we follow the crowd? These are the kinds of questions that studying sociology can help us answer. So what exactly is sociology? The word sociology is made up from soci, as in society, and ology, which means the study of or the science of. Just as in biology, you scientifically study plants and animals, so in sociology, you study the people and institutions which make up society. But how do we study society? We study society by looking at the various things which influence people's lives. What about you? What are the things you think influence your life? Maybe your family background, or your ethnicity, your social class, or your religion, maybe your gender. Which of these is most important? Have I missed any which are important to you? Sociologists are interested in all these things and investigate how they affect our lives. Studying sociology can help you think about the society you live in and how it affects your life. The society you live in. What kind of society do you live in? Do you think Britain is a good society? Is it sexist? Are people equal or unequal in terms of their money and wealth? Is there a problem with racism in our society? How big a part does tradition play in British life? Some sociologists write about what they think is wrong with our society, and some suggest ways to change it. You'll study some of them on this course. Do you recognize this man? He's Karl Marx. He said that the big problem with our society is that it is unequal and a small number of people control most of the power and wealth. Feminist sociologists say that our society is sexist, and solving this problem should be our priority. Studying sociology at A-Level will introduce you to new and sometimes controversial ideas. Importantly, sociology can help you decide what kind of society you want to live in. But good sociologists, like good biologists and chemists, have to give evidence for their theories. While biologists observe experiments, sociologists observe people. There are many ways to do this, and you will explore these on the course. Studying sociology is also a great way of finding out about other subjects. For example, a sociologist might want to research why girls tend to do better than boys at exams like A-levels. To answer this, they may want to study the historical evidence to see if things have always been this way, or if it's a recent change. They may want also to study the biological differences between boys and girls. Maybe the media influences these things. So studying sociology gives you access to a range of fields of study. If you're interested in what life is like for people with a different background to your own, and if the idea of having discussions with your classmates about things which affect your lives appeals to you, then you should consider sociology.
How would you describe the culture of the United States? Would you talk about the way we dress, the foods that originated here, the English language, the way we salute the American flag? What about our individualistic values and emphasis on competition? Culture can be defined as the language, norms, values, beliefs, and more that, together, form a people's way of life. It is a combination of elements that affect how people think, how they act, and what they own. American culture, for instance, includes everything just mentioned. It also includes our history, architecture, accepted behavior, and so much more. Culture is an essential part of being human. No one is completely without it. In fact, an individual can be part of many cultures and subcultures. For example, someone who lives in the U.S. could be part of the national culture in addition to the distinct culture of the South, a religious community, a heritage group, and more. There are many elements and aspects of culture. However, each can be categorized as either material or non-material culture. Material culture includes all the physical things that people create and attach meaning to. Clothing, food, tools, and architecture are examples of material culture that most people would think of. Natural objects and materials, rock, dirt, trees, etc., aren't considered to be part of material culture. However, how people view natural objects and how they use them are. Non-material culture includes creations and abstract ideas that are not embodied in physical objects. In other words, any intangible products created and shared between the members of a culture over time are aspects of their non-material culture. Social roles, rules, ethics, and beliefs are just some examples. All of them are crucial guides for members of a culture to use to know how to behave in their society and interpret the world. The word culture is often used as a synonym for nation and society, but they aren't the same thing. A nation is a territory with designated borders. A nation can be found on a map. A society is a population in which people interact and share common interests. A society can be found in a nation. Culture, on the other hand, is a people's shared way of living. Culture can be found in a society, and it can also be shared between societies. To illustrate the difference between these three concepts, think of the lost city of Atlantis described in literature. According to most accounts, it was its own continent, a round island somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Atlantis, the nation, would be composed of the entire island. It is rumored that the Atlanteans who lived there were a great people. Atlantis, the society, would be this population and the social world they create by interacting with each other. It is also thought that the lost city was very advanced, a marvel of architecture, engineering, and technology. The culture of Atlantis would include the physical things created by the Atlanteans and their way of life, their beliefs, language, norms, knowledge, and so on. Culture is a huge topic of study for sociologists. Culture exists anywhere humans exist, and no two cultures are exactly the same. We've started talking about culture in another lesson and discussed its combination of elements that together form a people's unique way of life. In this lesson, we are going to take a closer look at those elements, specifically symbols, language, values, and norms. These elements look different across cultures, and many change with time as a society evolves. The first element that exists in every culture is a variety of symbols. A symbol is anything that is used to stand for something else. People who share a culture often attach a specific meaning to an object, gesture, sound, or image. For example, a cross is a significant symbol to Christians. It is not simply two pieces of wood attached to each other, nor is it just an old object of torture and execution. To Christians, it represents the basis of their entire religion, and they have great reverence for the symbol. We can see more examples of symbols in American culture. Emoticons are combinations of keyboard characters that many use to represent their feelings online or through texting. The American flag represents our entire country. A red light at a traffic intersection is used to relay the message that you need to stop your vehicle. The second element present in every culture is a language. Language is a system of words and symbols used to communicate with other people. This includes full languages as we usually think of them, such as English, Spanish, French, etc. But it also includes body language, slang, and common phrases that are unique to certain groups of people. For example, even though English is spoken fluently in both America and Britain, we have slang and phrases that mean different things. American French fries are British chips, American cookies are British biscuits, and so on. Another example of how cultural languages differ beyond vocabulary is the fact that eye contact represents different meanings in different cultures. In America, eye contact suggests that you are paying attention and are interested in what a person has to say. In other cultures, eye contact may be considered rude and to be a challenge of authority. Another cultural element is a system of values, which are culturally defined standards for what is good or desirable. Members of the culture used the shared system of values to decide what is good and what is bad. For example, in America, we are individualistic. We encourage competition and emphasize personal achievement. A person who accepts a promotion in our culture is praised for their individual hard work and talent. But our values are in stark contrast with the collectivistic values of other cultures, where collaboration is encouraged and a person's success is only as good as their contributions to the group. The same person that is offered a promotion who lives in a collectivistic culture would consult with his family before accepting to ensure that it would be the most beneficial to the group as a whole. The last element of culture we'll discuss in this lesson is a collection of norms. Norms are culturally defined expectations of behavior. They are guidelines we use to determine how we should behave in any given situation and what would be considered inappropriate behavior. For example, we know that we should stand in line to use the restroom without even thinking about our behavior. If someone cuts in front of us, we are certainly irritated, if not angry, that the other person has not followed the norms of our culture. Norms vary in their perceived importance and in the way that others react to their violation. Some norms are turned into formal rules and laws, while others are simply unwritten rules of etiquette for everyday behavior. These unwritten rules can typically be categorized as either folkways or mores. Folkways are norms that dictate appropriate behavior for routine or casual interaction. In our culture, boys wear pants instead of skirts, and we all know not to pick our nose in public. These are casual rules for behavior. Although we may think that people who violate them are weird or rude, we don't think they should be imprisoned for their behavior. On the other hand, mores are norms that dictate morally right or wrong behavior. These are rules for behavior that are so important that they usually don't even get written down because they go without saying. Using loud profanity at a funeral is a fairly mild example. More serious mores are considered taboo, and people who violate them are considered unfit for society. For example, there are no formal laws against cannibalism in the United States, yet those who participate in cannibalism violate such an important norm that they are punished and severely ostracized from society. You have probably heard about a famous debate in psychology and sociology that is known as nature versus nurture. The question is if human behavior is a product of our genes and evolution, or of experience and social contact. The majority of sociologists believe that the answer to this question is likely a combination of both, but that nurture plays the most important role in at least our social behavior. So, let's talk more about nurture, specifically about the importance of socialization. Socialization is a lifelong process during which we learn about social expectations and how to interact with other people. During socialization, we learn about our own culture, including behavioral norms and values that teach us how to fit into our society. As children, we learn to walk, talk, and feed ourselves, and also the difference between right and wrong from the people around us. Through socialization, we acquire a personal identity and learn to value our connections with others. This process continues for an entire lifetime. Nearly all of the behavior that we consider to be human nature is actually learned through socialization. For example, it is easy to assume that standards of beauty are the same all over the world. Surely, a woman who Americans instinctively find attractive would also be considered attractive by other cultures, right? Yet, there are cultures in which women go to drastic measures to elongate their necks and shrink their feet in order to obtain their cultural standards of beauty, which clearly are not the same as ours. Therefore, beauty may not be instinctive after all, but culturally defined and learned from others. Socialization is such a basic part of our lives that it is easy to overlook its importance. But it is the reason we laugh, cry, talk, and do many of the other things we think of as just a part of being human. Socialization doesn't always happen, though, and certainly can't happen in social isolation. This is a state that occurs when someone experiences a complete lack of contact with the social world. We are talking about no communication with humans, no visual sighting of them, no access to society whatsoever. Social isolation would be horribly lonely for someone used to being around people. Imagine what a man would be like if he lived in a city for 30 years and was then stranded completely alone on a deserted island for the rest of his life. But social isolation from the beginning of one's life seems to be just as bad, if not worse. From what sociologists have been able to tell from case studies, individuals who grow up in social isolation have no chance to learn all of the feelings and behaviors we mistakenly believe that we are born with. So, although they look human, they don't act human. An example can be seen in the tragic, well-known case of Anna, an unwanted child of a farmer's daughter. Her mother confined Anna to a dark, windowless room, and although she provided her with enough milk to keep her alive, had no other contact with her. When social workers found Anna, she was 5 years old and had lived her entire life tied to a chair in that room. She didn't know how to walk, talk, or even chew. She was also extremely apathetic and never laughed, cried, or had much of a reaction to other people at all. Unfortunately, what happened to Anna is not a solitary instance. There have been many other cases in which children have been found in similar circumstances. Each time, the child seemed almost inhuman because of the lack of socialization. Even studies involving monkeys show us the importance of socialization and the negative effects of social isolation. Harry Harlow conducted a famous experiment in which he split into groups baby monkeys who had been separated from their mothers at birth. Long story short, he discovered that monkeys who were placed in isolation for just 6 months had a dramatic effect on their development. These monkeys were unable to interact and socialize once exposed to other monkeys. They had never learned how. How do we learn to interact with other people? Socialization is a lifelong process during which we learn about social expectations and how to interact with other people. Nearly all of the behavior that we consider to be human nature is actually learned through socialization. And it is during socialization that we learn how to walk, talk, and feed ourselves, about behavioral norms that help us fit into our society, and so much more. Socialization occurs throughout our life, but some of the most important socialization occurs in childhood. So let's talk about the most influential agents of socialization. These are the people or groups responsible for our socialization during childhood, including family, school, peers, and mass media. There's no better way to start than to talk about the role of family in our social development, as family is usually considered to be the most important agent of socialization. As infants, we are completely dependent on others to survive. Our parents, or those who play the parent role, are responsible for teaching us to function and care for ourselves. They, along with the rest of our family, also teach us about close relationships, group life, and how to share resources. Additionally, they provide us with our first system of values, norms, and beliefs, a system that is usually a reflection of their own social status, religion, ethnic group, and more. For example, Alexander, a young boy who lives in America, was born to an immigrant family. He grew up bilingual and was taught the importance of collectivistic values through socialization with his family. This experience differs drastically from someone born to an older, traditional American family that would emphasize the English language and individualistic values. The next important agent of childhood socialization is the school. Of course, the official purpose of school is to transfer subject knowledge and teach life skills, such as following directions and meeting deadlines. But students don't just learn from the academic curriculum prepared by teachers and school administrators. In school, we also learn social skills through our interactions with teachers, staff, and other students. For example, we learn the importance of obeying authority, and that to be successful, we must learn to be quiet, to wait, and sometimes to act interested, even when we're not. Alexander, like other children, might even learn things from his teacher that she did not intend to teach. For instance, he might learn that it's best to yell out an answer instead of raising his hand. When he does so, he gets rare attention from the teacher and is hardly ever punished. Another agent of socialization that relates to school is our peer group. Unlike the agents we've already discussed, family and school, peer groups give us an opportunity as children to form relationships with others on our own terms, plus learn things without the direction of an adult. Our peers have an incredible amount of influence on us when we're young, so it's understandable that parents worry about the type of friends we choose. Often, we discuss topics and learn behavioral norms from our peers that our parents do not or would not approve of. However, our peers also give us a chance to develop many of the social skills we need as adults. For instance, Alexander will certainly experience moments when his friend's behavior and/or values contradict the norms and values he obtained from his family. He has to learn to decide which norms and values to keep, reject, or use and follow in certain situations. The last agent of childhood socialization we're going to discuss in this lesson is mass media, which includes television, internet, radio, movies, books, and magazines, just to name a few. This is another agent that our parents are understandably concerned about. As with our peers, we often learn things through mass media that our parents would probably rather we didn't. Especially today, children are exposed to a wide variety of content, including violence and sex, which many deem inappropriate. Mass media also seems to reinforce gender and other stereotypes. For example, Alexander loves to watch cartoons, but they perpetuate the idea that men are more important than women. Women are usually portrayed as supporting characters, mothers, girlfriends, or damsels in distress. As a result, Alexander is continually provided with evidence that women are not as brave and intelligent as men. There are a number of ways in which we socially construct the world around us. In other words, we use our social interactions with others to make sense of and give purpose to our lives. One way in which we do this is to create social structures that give us cues for how to behave. Statuses and roles are two of these structures. We previously discussed statuses in depth, so now we turn to social roles. A social role defines a set of behaviors that are expected of someone who holds a particular status. It's easy to confuse a status and a role, but the basic difference between them is that we occupy a status and play a role. Every status has an expected set of behaviors, a role. A woman becomes a mother when she has a child, and so occupies the status of mother. She's expected to also play the role of mother by caring for and loving her children, among other things. Interestingly, role expectations can change over time and also differ between cultures. Not that long ago, it was a role expectation for mothers to stay at home with their children and keep house, while the fathers played breadwinner. Today in our culture, this still occurs, but is no longer a strict expectation of the mother's role, just an acceptable option. In other cultures, however, a mother working outside the home is still considered to be strange or even unacceptable. All of us typically occupy many statuses and play the roles attached to each one. Sometimes a status has more than one role associated with it. This is known as a role set. For example, a teacher plays one role in relation to his students, another role in relation to his fellow teachers, another in relation to the school board, and so on. It can be stressful to play so many roles at once. Have you ever been stressed because of overlapping work, school, and social commitments? Did you feel as if there wasn't enough time in the day to make everyone happy? If so, you were probably experiencing role conflict, which is what happens when role demands from different statuses conflict with each other and cause stress. The more statuses we have and the more roles we play, the more likely we are to experience role conflict. If our fictional mother worked as an office manager, volunteered for a philanthropic organization, participated in church activities, and provided care for her own aging mother, she would likely experience role conflict because the responsibilities would sometimes overlap and clash. Though meeting the role demands of different statuses can be overwhelming, it can also be difficult to meet all of the role obligations of a single status. Role strain is when the role demands from a single status cause conflict or become stressful. For example, a teacher might feel overwhelmed by the demands of his role set. The demands of the school board, principal, and students aren't always complementary. He would probably feel stressed or even burdened by the different aspects of his job. Though some roles stay with us for our entire lives, others don't last. And sometimes role conflict and/or role strain can become too much to handle. Role exit occurs when an individual leaves an important social status and stops playing its attached role. By important, we're talking about a status that was central to one's identity, such as a master status. By exiting the status and attached role, either voluntarily or involuntarily, the person typically has to redefine relationships with others and reestablish a new identity. For example, When our teacher retires, he will experience a role exit. He will no longer have to play the role of teacher, which was an integral part of his identity for so many years. He will have to establish a new one as a retiree who has no students, fellow faculty, teaching responsibilities, etc.
Have you ever gone shopping for toys and noticed that in most stores, toys are separated into sections for girls or boys? The girl section is probably bright pink with sparkly ponies and princesses everywhere. In contrast, the boy section is usually blue and brown with toys like plastic guns, soldiers, and cars. Our society teaches little girls and boys our stereotypical expectations from very early on. This lesson focuses on the concepts of sex and gender, then discusses non-traditional forms of gender such as transsexuals. Finally, we'll cover the idea of sexual orientation and how different orientations might be viewed in society. First, we should define the difference between the terms sex and gender. In most social sciences, sex refers to biological differences between males and females. Biological differences are usually split up into two categories. The first category is called primary sex characteristics, which include internal and external genitals. Put simply, men have a penis and testes, while women have a clitoris and ovaries. The second category that is used to differentiate between men and women is called secondary sex characteristics, which includes non-genital differences. For example, there are hormonal differences. Men produce more testosterone, while women produce more estrogen. Men are usually taller and physically stronger than women, have more facial hair, and they more often tend to go bald. In contrast to the biological concept of sex, gender is how masculine or feminine a person feels, and how he or she expresses those traits to others. In other words, gender is where you fit in using stereotypes about what is traditionally male or female. For example, stereotypes of men are that they're better at math, like to watch sports, and are more stinky and messy than the average woman. Stereotypes of women are that they like to bake, enjoy being around children, and like to wear pink frilly dresses. When you think about your own preferences and behaviors, are you pretty masculine or are you more feminine? This psychological experience of being male or female is gender. Now that we've defined sex and gender, you might not have realized that so far we've only talked about the concepts in terms of male versus female. Many people do not consider the fact that many people who study these topics acknowledge that there are in fact more than two categories of sex or gender. There are two concepts that are important for you to know. The first concept is that of people who are called intersexed. Intersexed people have an unusual biological makeup that doesn't match either a traditional male or female. For example, traditional men have a chromosome pair we call XY, and traditional women have a chromosome pair we call XX. Did you know that there are lots of other possible combinations? There are people who have 3 chromosomes, such as XYY or XXX. These people often have genitals that are some kind of mixture, such as a small penis or an enlarged clitoris. There are other types of intersexed people who have one of the traditional pairs of chromosomes, but their hormones are unusual, such as getting extra doses of testosterone or estrogen when they were fetuses. This results in other types of bodies, such as a body that might have both a penis and breasts. Scientists now acknowledge that because of intersexed conditions, there are really more sexes than just male and female. If you count all the different possible intersex conditions, you might say that there could be 20 different possible sexes or more. Another way that people might not match how we traditionally view sex and gender is if they are a transsexual. Transsexual people feel that they are a different sex than the one based on their physical body. So a transsexual person might be biologically male, but feel inside that they are really a female. This person might prefer to wear women's clothes, go by a woman's name, and date men. It could be the other way around as well. A biological female might feel inside that a male assignment is more fitting. Transsexual people sometimes take hormones or have surgery to change their bodies to be more in alignment with how they feel on the inside. A similar term you might have heard is transvestite, which refers to people who are comfortable with their biological sex, but prefer to wear opposite-sex clothing. Being a transvestite does not necessarily mean that you are also a transsexual. They are two different things. The last topic we'll cover in this lesson on sex and gender is the idea of sexual orientation. Sexual orientation refers to whether you are sexually attracted to men, women, or both. Most of the time, sexual orientation is divided into three possible categories. First, most people identify as heterosexual, which means that you are sexually attracted to people of the opposite sex. In other words, men would be attracted to women and vice versa. An alternative is to identify yourself as homosexual, which means you are sexually attracted to people of the same sex. So here, men are attracted to men and women are attracted to women. The third option is bisexual, which means you are sexually attracted to both men and women. Note that there are actually more categories than just these three, but most people fall into one of these three groups. Now, like I said before, most people think of sexual orientation as one of these three categories. However, many people who study sexual orientation actually believe that sexual orientation should not be in categories like this, where you need to pick one of the three options. Another possibility is that sexual orientation could be on a sliding scale. This idea was popularized by a famous sex researcher named Alfred Kinsey, who conducted thousands of interviews regarding people's personal sexual lives and preferences. Kinsey believed that sexual interest could be viewed as flexible. To explain, think about a continuum for another variable, such as height. On one end of the scale, you have people who are very, very short, and on the other end of the scale, you have people who are very, very tall. People on either end are very unusual because most people are somewhere in the middle. Kinsey said the same idea could be applied to sexual interest. You could have a scale where one end was very heterosexual. People only have experiences and interest in the opposite sex exclusively. On the other end is very homosexual. People only have experiences and interest in the same sex. However, Kinsey said that most people will actually be somewhere in the middle. Throughout life, people can move around on the scale. You might be mostly heterosexual, but have a single experience with someone of the same sex, or a fantasy about someone of the same sex. This would move you up on the scale just a little bit. So in summary, it's possible that sexual orientation is more like a scale that you can move up and down over your life, and not a simple category where you're stuck forever. Note that this theory implies that most people are at least a little bisexual.
Are you currently attending college? If so, do you expect your degree to help you reach your career goals and hopefully make more money? Do you ever fantasize of landing that dream job with a high salary that would greatly improve your lifestyle? If so, you would certainly not be alone. Many dream of improving socioeconomic conditions, which, in turn, can also improve social status. In other lessons, we've discussed social stratification, a system by which society ranks categories of people in a hierarchy. We've also discussed the American class system and the differences between upper, middle, and lower class. We are fortunate enough to live in a society with an open system of social stratification. That is, with the right opportunity, we have the ability to move up in society and become a member of a different social class. We aren't necessarily stuck with the social status with which we were born. This is known as social mobility, a change in position within the social hierarchy. Earning a college degree or professional certification, landing a higher paying job, or marrying someone who is wealthy can help someone move up the social ladder. We also have the American dream. We love stories of people who rise from rags to riches and continue promoting the idea that anyone can succeed with the right opportunity. Of course, there's also downward social mobility. Losing a job, dropping out of school, or being publicly disgraced may contribute to being knocked down a rung. Upward and downward social mobility are both types of vertical mobility, a change in position between social levels. A factory worker who becomes a wealthy entrepreneur experiences significant vertical mobility, moving upward through the ranks of the social hierarchy. Although he started as part of the working class, he ended up as part of the upper class. In reality, it is rare for someone to jump that far on the social ladder. Horizontal mobility, a change in position at the same social level, is actually much more common than vertical mobility. It is almost always the result of changing occupations within the same social class. A nurse who leaves one hospital to take a position as a nurse at another hospital, and a manager who accepts a similar position at another company are both experiencing horizontal mobility. Although they have changed jobs, they remain at their same level within the social hierarchy. Sociologists study not only the actual change in social position, but also the amount of time the change takes to occur. There are both shorter and longer-term changes in social status. So far, we've been talking about intragenerational mobility, which is a change in social position that occurs during a person's lifetime. Someone who achieves the American dream, climbing several rungs on the social ladder through some achievement, has experienced a change in social status over a relatively short amount of time. On the other hand, intergenerational mobility is a change in social position that occurs over multiple generations. This is social mobility of children in relation to their parents. Adults are most likely to be part of the same occupational or income category as their parents, experiencing only horizontal mobility. If a family does experience vertical mobility, the change usually happens in incremental steps instead of jumping from the bottom to the top of a ladder. For example, the child of a factory worker might become a factory supervisor. The child of a factory supervisor might become an executive in the company. At this point, the family has moved up a level in the social hierarchy over a relatively longer period of time. Intergenerational mobility reveals that long-term changes in society can affect an individual's way of life and social status. When the economy itself is growing, there is an abundance of opportunities for social mobility. Industrialization, increases in education, and technological advances have allowed many Americans to improve their social status and find higher paying jobs than their parents. As the economy declines, however, so do opportunities. Today's recession, for example, severely limits the opportunities for upward mobility. Social groups are everywhere and are a basic part of human life. Everywhere you look, there seems to be groups of people. A main focus of sociology is the study of these social groups. A social group consists of two or more people who regularly interact and share a sense of unity and common identity. In other words, it's a group of people who see each other frequently and consider themselves a part of the group. Except in rare cases, we all typically belong to many different types of social groups. For example, you could be a member of a sports team, club, church group, college class, workplace, and more. No two groups are created equal. Each typically has its own purpose, culture, norms, etc. Sociologists differentiate between several different types of social groups. In this lesson, we'll discuss primary groups, secondary groups, and reference groups. Primary groups are those which are close-knit. They are typically small-scale, include intimate relationships, and are usually long-lasting. The members of primary groups feel a strong personal identity with the group. The nuclear family, which consists of a pair of adults and their children, is a good example. Members of a nuclear family typically interact on a daily basis. For them, the family is an important source of identity and purpose. Love and affection bind the family members together, and the relationships are enduring. Even when members move away from each other, they are still a part of the family. Although the nuclear family is considered the ideal primary group by some sociologists, it is not the only example. Many people are also a member of a group of close friends. This group is usually small, and the relationships are still close-knit and enduring, so it is also a primary group. The term primary is used with these groups because they are the primary source of relationships and socialization. The relationships in our primary groups give us love, security, and companionship. We also learn values and norms from our family and friends that stay with us for most, if not all, of our lives. Secondary groups are another type of social group. They have the opposite characteristics of primary groups. They can be small or large and are mostly impersonal and usually short-term. These groups are typically found at work and school. An example of a secondary group is a committee organized to plan a holiday party at work. Members of the committee meet infrequently and for only a short period of time. Although group members may have some similar interests, the purpose of the group is about the task instead of the relationships. Sometimes secondary groups become pretty informal, and the members get to know each other fairly well. Even so, their friendships exist in a limited context. They won't necessarily remain close beyond the holiday party. Other common examples of secondary groups are class project groups, college classes, sports teams, work teams, and neighborhoods. All of these groups are only temporary, even if they last for a year, and the relationships within the group are fairly shallow and typically touch and go. Of course, there are times when we do meet people in secondary groups that become a part of one of our primary groups. This demonstrates that the distinction between primary and secondary groups isn't always absolute or concrete. You may meet your best friend at work or school in a secondary group, and he or she then becomes a member of your primary group. The last type of group we'll discuss in this lesson is a reference group. Reference groups are groups that we look to for guidance in order to evaluate our behaviors and attitudes. They are basically generalized versions of role models. You may or may not belong to the group, but you use its standards of measurement as a frame of reference. For example, if a teenager wants to know if she is slim enough, she may use supermodels as a reference. Or if a recent college graduate is unsure if an offered salary is fair, he may use the average starting salary of graduates from his school as a reference. Frequently, people hope to be identified with their reference groups, especially if they aren't members of them, so they try to act like those they think typify these groups. If your reference group is a particular athletic team, you will dress, speak, and act quite differently than if your reference group is a local wine club. So, a reference group helps to shape not only a person's expectations and outlook, but also appearance and style. Social groups come in all shapes and sizes. You may have a small family and a close group of friends, but I'm sure you know others who have a large family and a wide group of friends. In a previous lesson, we discussed the distinction between several types of social groups and how the type of group can determine group dynamics and relationships. However, the size of the group also has a significant effect on these aspects of a group. The most basic, fundamental type of social group that consists of only two people is called a dyad. The relationship between the two people can be linked through romantic interest, family relation, work, school, and so on. As you likely know from personal experience, these relationships can be emotionally intense, but also unstable and sometimes only temporary. In a dyad, both members of the group must cooperate to make it work. If just one fails to cooperate, the group will fall apart. If you add another person to a dyad, it becomes a triad. A triad is a social group that consists of three people. This seemingly simple addition of just one person significantly affects the group interactions and dynamics. The relationships in a triad can still be fairly intense, but the group is typically more stable than a dyad. If two people in a triad have a dispute, the third member of the group can act as a mediator and help reach a compromise. If push comes to shove, one person can leave a triad and a group would still exist, unlike the one person who would remain after the breaking of a dyad. Another group characteristic that is strikingly different between dyads and triads is the allocation of responsibility. Imagine you work in an office with only one other person. You bring a sandwich to work and put it in the fridge. Later, when you go to eat your sandwich, half of it is missing. Because there is only one other person in the office, you immediately deduce the culprit. However, if you add just one more person to the scenario, you could not automatically know which of the two office mates ate your sandwich. By changing the dyad to a triad, the lines of responsibility are blurred. As a group's size increases beyond 3 members, there are a number of trends that emerge. The intimacy and loyalty of the members decrease as the group grows larger. Because the relationships are less intimate, group members feel less obligation and responsibility. The contribution of each member in a large group is less than it would be in a small group. A larger group is also less likely to reach a consensus because of the plethora of ideas and opinions. On the positive side, large groups do have more stability because the group exists even with the loss of several members. Regardless of the size of our groups, we have boundaries and membership criteria that distinguish members from non-members. These can be physical boundaries and criteria, such as demographic location or common physical characteristics. They can also be implied boundaries and criteria, such as personality and personal tastes. All groups, however, tend to maintain the physical or implied boundaries and membership criteria by developing a strong distinction between we and they. The individuals that are included in we form what is known as the in-group. The in-group is any group that one belongs to or identifies with. Likewise, the individuals that are included in they form the out-group, which is any group that one does not belong to or identify with. For example, imagine you're a member of a soccer team. When thinking of your team members, you would use the term we. We are going to win. Your team is the in-group. When thinking of the team you'll be competing against, you would use the term they. They are going to lose. That team is the out-group. In-groups and out-groups have no specific size limits. An in-group may be as small as a dyad or as large as the world. The out-group, then, is simply everyone who is not in that dyad or is outside the world. People tend to think of the in-group as being special or unique. The tendency to favor an in-group is called in-group favoritism or in-group bias. On the other hand, people tend to think of the out-group as less worthy or commonplace and may even feel hostile against the members of the out-group. The tendency to feel threatened by or hostile against the out-group is called out-group derogation. A well-known experiment that illustrates in-group favoritism and out-group derogation was conducted by Muzaffer and Carolyn Sharif in 1954. They took a group of young boys for an extended stay at a summer camp, where they were divided into 2 groups. The boys did not know each other, and at first they felt a sense of camaraderie with all of the campers. However, as time passed, they started to feel a strong loyalty to their assigned group and became increasingly antagonistic and hostile towards the other group. Competition became fierce during games and activities. But when the experimenters created some emergency situations, both groups were required to cooperate. The water supply was interrupted, and as the 2 groups worked as a single group to fix the problem, their old hostilities were forgotten. This experiment shows how in-groups are constantly changing, and that boundaries of groups can be changed or adapted for the situation. And before the boys came together to problem solve, they exhibited classic signs of in-group favoritism and out-group derogation. Why do people act differently in each of their social groups? How have social groups, formal organizations, and society as a whole changed with time? These are questions that Max Weber, one of the founding fathers of sociology, would ask. He thought of sociology as a science of social action. Weber believed that understanding why people do the things they do is the basic building block of sociology, a concept he termed Verstehen. He believed that sociologists should not just study a group of people, but also try to gain an empathetic understanding for the individuals in that group. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, put yourself in his shoes, or walk a mile in each other's shoes. This common sentiment illustrates what Verstehen is all about, gaining an understanding of social action from the insider's point of view in order to better understand the interactions within a group and the group's purpose. This, in turn, helps to explain how groups of people make sense of the world around them, how they fit into society as a whole, and how they've helped society evolve over time. Think about the technological advances we've made just in the last decade. If you were to travel back in time and introduce the same technology hundreds of years sooner, the people of that time period would likely think it was magic. In fact, I'm sure you learned in history class, or even by watching TV, that many traditions of ancient societies were practiced because of a belief that everyday phenomena were supernatural occurrences. In our modern society, however, we attribute the same phenomena to simple science. Weber introduced the concept of rationalization to explain how Western society has shifted from a mystic or traditional orientation to a more rational orientation. Rationalization is the process of replacing traditional and emotional thought with reason and practicality. Weber believed that most societies throughout history were governed by tradition, and that the most significant trend in modern sociology is an increasing rationalization of every part of our daily lives. The rise of scientific study, the development of capitalism, and the introduction of bureaucracy into government over the last 200 years or so are all large examples of this trend. We can look at additional evidence just in the last few generations. For example, how did you or would you choose which college to attend? If you chose a college for its ability to prepare you for a desired profession, you would be using rational thought to make your decision. On the other hand, if you were to choose a college simply because your parents and grandparents went there, you would be using traditional thought to make your decision. As rationalization continues to occur in our society, more and more college students use rational thought over the traditional thought of past generations. There are both advantages and disadvantages to the continued rationalization of our society. Weber believed that a bureaucracy, a rigid, formalized organizational structure, was, for the most part, an example of an advantage or positive consequence of rationalization. According to him, the characteristics of an ideal bureaucracy made it the most stable type of organization. As a result, bureaucratic systems are capable of handling more complex operations than traditional systems, which has helped our society grow and advance. A disadvantage or negative consequence of rationalization and bureaucracy is what Weber termed the iron cage, which he described as a social order so organized and rational that it traps people inside an invisible prison. In other words, society is continually rationalized until it prohibits individual freedom, expression, and potential. If you've ever seen Doctor Who, you can think of the iron cage as the society the Cybermen try to create. Everything about the world is uniform, and there is no tolerance for individuality. Weber identified 4 types of rationality that we all use: practical, theoretical, substantive, and formal. Practical rationality is used to complete daily tasks and activities in a practical way. It helps us decide on the best course of action for each event in our lives. You use practical rationality when deciding what to eat for each meal and what to wear every day. Theoretical rationality is more abstract and involves logical deduction. It is used to conceptualize and understand the world around us. You use theoretical rationality when learning a new abstract concept and when using deductive and inductive reasoning. Substantive rationality is used to make choices between right and wrong based on our own values. You use substantive rationality when opening the door for someone and volunteering for a nonprofit organization. Similarly, formal rationality is also used to choose between right and wrong. However, instead of basing the decision on morality and values, it is based on rules, regulations, and laws. You use formal rationality when obeying the speed limit and paying taxes. It is on this last type of rationality that Weber's concept of rationalization is based. His fear was that formal rationality was becoming more and more dominant in our society, and substantive rationality was declining in importance. For example, formal rationality tends to be impersonal, and rules are frequently followed for their own sake. Weber feared that this would become so common that people would assume it always made the most sense to follow the standard procedure. This would choke innovation and individuality and result in the iron cage.